The Magical History Tour is a 6-day motorcycle journey through Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, exploring and learning about the Civil War battles around Antietam, Harpers Ferry, and Gettysburg, as well as touring the Flight 93 Memorial in Stoystown, Pennsylvania. Antietam, the bloodiest day in American history. 23,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing after 12 hours of combat on September 17, 1862. The Battle of Antietam ended the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia's first invasion into the North and led Abraham Lincoln to issue the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. Our tour started at the artillery display and the Dunkers Church, the focal point of a number of Union attacks against the Confederate Army. We then rode along the perimeter of the cornfield where the Union Army marched through the cornfield to attempt to take the Dunkers Church, but instead ran into considerable artillery fire before withdrawing. This occurred during the morning of the battle, around 10 a.m., when 2 regiments of the Union Army advanced, only to be confronted by a newly arrived division of the Confederate Army. The morning phase ended with casualties on both sides of almost 13,000 people. We then went to the observation tower at the sunken road, where the 5,600 casualties gave the road the new name, the Bloody Lane. The carnage on the Bloody Lane lasted from 9:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. The battle itself proved to be a draw, neither side claiming victory, but its outcome prevented the Confederacy from gaining financial and political support from Europe. We left Antietam by riding towards Burnside's Bridge and then on to Harpers Ferry. General Stonewall Jackson returned to Harpers Ferry on September 13, 1862, and began his siege of it as a prelude to the Battle of Antietam. Jackson took possession of Maryland Heights, Loudon Heights, and Schoolhouse Ridge, trapping the Union garrison inside Harpers Ferry. Jackson's artillery assault on the Union forces secured the surrender of 12,500 Union troops, the largest surrender of Federal forces during the entire Civil War. We rode through the countryside south of the Antietam battlefield in Maryland and crossed into West Virginia to begin our tour of Harpers Ferry National Historical Park. We walked down the cobblestoned Shenandoah Street, being transported back to the 1850s. The street had numerous historic buildings to explore. The Industry Museum showcases the factories of Virginius Island. Virginius Island used the Shenandoah River to become a thriving industrial town in the first half of the 19th century. At its peak in 1850, upwards of 180 residents lived in some 20 houses. However, the industry was effectively destroyed by the Civil War as the armies evacuated the island. Completed just before the John Brown raid in 1859, the Master Armorer's House was one of the newest buildings in Harpers Ferry at the outbreak of the Civil War. The strategic location of the Master Armorer's House made it ideal for the headquarters of the commanding officer at Harpers Ferry. The most famous general who stayed in the Master Armorer's House was General Ulysses S. Grant. Once we finished looking at the exhibits in the Armorer's House, we walked out and back towards Shenandoah Street. Once there, we walked up High Street, looking at the various residences in Harpers Ferry. Potomac Street is the business district of Harpers Ferry. Here we found several taverns serving typical bar foods and beverages, ice cream parlors, perfect for a hot summer's walk, as well as gift shops to tempt the curious tourists. Once we finished on Potomac Street, we headed back to the motorcycles and our hotel to get ready for our next adventure, Gettysburg. Our Gettysburg tour began with an hour-long ride through the Catoctin Mountains in Maryland, and then into Fairfield, Pennsylvania, and finally, Gettysburg. The Catoctin Mountains are best known as the site of Camp David, the mountain retreat for U.S. presidents. We rode along Maryland Route 77 through Cunningham Falls State Park and the Catoctin Mountain Park, where the roads followed the terrain of the mountains with its twists and turns, making for an enjoyable start to the day. As we turned off Route 77, we then headed into Pennsylvania, where the roads changed from mountainous curves and twists into winding farmlands and orchards. Then, leaving the rural areas, we headed into Gettysburg. We stopped for lunch at the Dobbin House Tavern, the oldest house in Gettysburg. Built in 1776, the building is also noted as the first stop on the Underground Railroad north of the Mason-Dixon line. We took a bus tour to escape the sweltering heat and humidity, and one of our first sights was the fields around the battlefield with the crossed fencing. Next was the monument to the 9th Massachusetts Battery. The key terrain for both armies were Little Round Top and Big Round Top, which dominated our view of the battlefield. From there, we could see across the entire landscape of the battle. The key monument is the Pennsylvania Memorial, honoring every soldier from Pennsylvania who fought at Gettysburg. Next was the monument to the 8th Pennsylvania Cavalry. Then we looked across the fields where General Pickett led his men in Pickett's charge. Our last stop was the North Carolina Monument, honoring the 32 North Carolina regiments that fought at Gettysburg. With our tour over, we got back on our bikes and headed back to the hotel to get ready for the final spot of our history tour, the Flight 93 Memorial. The Flight 93 National Memorial commemorates the crash of United Airlines Flight 93, which was one of 4 aircraft hijacked in the September 11th attacks. The memorial is located in Stony Creek Township, Stoystown, Pennsylvania. The memorial honors the 40 passengers and crew of Flight 93 who stopped the terrorists from reaching their target by fighting back against the hijackers. Of the 4 aircraft hijacked on September 11, 2001, Flight 93 is the only one that did not reach the hijackers' intended target, presumed to be the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. Several passengers and crew members made cellular telephone calls from the plane and learned about the attacks on the World Trade Center in New York City and the Pentagon in Virginia. As a result, the passengers and crew members decided to mount an assault to retake control of the aircraft from the hijackers. The plane crashed in a field about 150 miles northwest of Washington, D.C., killing all 40 passengers and crew members and the 4 hijackers. Located underneath the flight path and final approach of Flight 93, the Wall of Names is constructed from white marble. From the ceremonial gate, constructed of hemlock wood, visitors can look down the flight path to the last piece of granite etched with the time of the crash and the impact site, marked by a distant sandstone boulder. 40 individually selected and polished marble stones are inscribed with each of the passenger or crew member names. Black granite denotes the flight path. The Tower of Voices is conceived as a monumental 93-foot-tall musical instrument holding 40 wind chimes, representing each of the 40 passengers and crew members of Flight 93. The Tower of Voices provides a living memorial in sound as a set of 40 tones or voices to remember the 40 through those unique voices. Having finished the tour of the Flight 93 Memorial, the next leg of our journey was to ride back to Dayton and finish our 1,400-mile magical history tour.